My name is Sarah, I'm 32 years old, and I've been married to Michael for 7 years. We met in Chicago during a corporate training event, one of those boring seminars where everyone pretends to care about team-building exercises. He was charming, successful, and had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room. Within a year, we were married. Within 2, we had moved to a beautiful house in the suburbs of Denver, the kind with a white picket fence and neighbors who wave at you every morning. It was perfect. Too perfect, maybe. Because perfection, I've learned, is just a mask waiting to be ripped off. It started 3 months ago when Michael's phone wouldn't stop buzzing during dinner. He kept glancing at it, his jaw tightening with each notification. When I asked who it was, he said it was work. But his eyes told a different story. That night, after he fell asleep, I did something I'd never done before. I looked at his phone, and what I found changed everything. If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that subscribe button. I promise you, this gets even more complicated, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The messages were from a woman named Rebecca. At first, I thought it was an affair. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely scroll through the texts. But then I read them more carefully. She wasn't talking about romantic getaways or secret meetings. She was talking about a boy, a 16-year-old boy named Jake. And she was asking Michael for money, for support, for acknowledgement. She was asking him to finally be a father. I confronted him the next morning. He didn't deny it. He just sat there at our kitchen table, staring at his coffee like it held all the answers he couldn't give me. He told me Jake was from a relationship before we met, back when he lived in Seattle. He said Rebecca had told him she didn't want him involved, that she could handle it alone. He said he'd tried to reach out a few times over the years, but she'd always pushed him away. Until now. Now Jake was asking questions. Now Jake wanted to meet his father, and Michael didn't know what to do. I should have been furious. I should have screamed, thrown things, demanded a divorce. But instead, I felt something unexpected. I felt curious, maybe even sympathetic. Michael looked so broken, so lost. This man who always had everything under control was crumbling in front of me. And despite the lies, despite the secret he'd kept for our entire marriage, part of me wanted to help him. Part of me wanted to fix this. That was my first mistake. Michael and I talked for hours that day. He explained that when Rebecca got pregnant, they were both young and scared. She came from a wealthy family in Boston who didn't approve of him, and she'd decided to raise the baby alone with their support. Michael said he'd offered to be involved, but her family made it clear he wasn't welcome. So he'd walked away. He sent money occasionally through a lawyer, but he never pushed for more. He convinced himself it was for the best, until Rebecca's recent messages made it clear that Jake was struggling, acting out, and asking about the father he'd never known. I suggested we invite them to Denver. Michael looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but I insisted. If Jake was going to be part of Michael's life, he'd be part of mine too. We needed to face this together. Besides, I was curious about this boy, about this piece of my husband's past that I'd never known existed. Rebecca and Jake arrived on a Saturday afternoon in late August. The moment I opened the door, I felt the air shift. Rebecca was stunning, with dark hair and sharp features that spoke of old money and privilege. She was polite but cold, her eyes scanning our home like she was appraising its worth. But Jake was different. Before you hear what happened next, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Trust me, you'll want to follow this story to the end. He had Michael's eyes, that same deep brown that had drawn me in all those years ago. But there was a sadness in them, a heaviness that no 16-year-old should carry. He barely spoke during that first dinner. He just watched Michael with this mixture of hope and resentment, like he couldn't decide whether to embrace him or hate him. My heart broke for him, and that was when everything got complicated. Over the next few weeks, Jake started visiting more often. Rebecca would drop him off on weekends, and Michael would try to bond with him through sports games and movies. But Jake was distant with his father, barely giving him more than one-word answers. With me, though, it was different. He'd sit in the kitchen while I cooked, telling me about school, about his friends, about how his grandfather controlled everything in his life and how suffocated he felt. He'd help me with grocery shopping, laugh at my terrible jokes, and slowly, the sadness in his eyes began to lift. I told myself I was just being kind. I told myself I was helping Michael build a bridge to his son. But deep down, I knew something else was happening. I was connecting with Jake in a way that felt dangerous. He was vulnerable and searching for something, and I was becoming whatever he needed me to be. A friend, a confidant, someone who understood him, Michael noticed. He started making comments about how Jake seemed more comfortable with me than with him. He'd joke about it at first, but I could hear the edge in his voice, the jealousy, the insecurity. And instead of pulling back, I found myself defending my relationship with Jake. I found myself looking forward to his visits more than I should have. Then came the night that changed everything. Michael had to fly to Atlanta for a business conference. Rebecca called and said she had an emergency and needed someone to watch Jake for the weekend. Without thinking, I said yes. For the first time, Jake and I would be alone in the house for 3 days. Michael hesitated but ultimately agreed. What else could he do? That Friday night, Jake and I ordered pizza and watched movies like we'd done before. But something felt different. The house was too quiet. We were too aware of each other. When our hands accidentally touched, reaching for the same slice, we both pulled back like we'd been burned. The air between us crackled with a tension I didn't want to name. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to subscribe. I share these real stories because I know I'm not the only one who's been through something like this. Saturday morning, Jake came downstairs earlier than usual. I was making breakfast, and he just stood in the doorway watching me. When I turned around, he said something that made my blood run cold. He said, "I wish you were my mom instead of Rebecca." I laughed it off, told him that was sweet but complicated. But he didn't laugh. He just looked at me with those eyes, Michael's eyes, and said, "I mean it. You make me feel like I matter." I should have shut it down right there. I should have called Michael, called Rebecca, called anyone, but I didn't. Instead, I told Jake he did matter, that he was important, that I cared about him. And the way he smiled at me in that moment made me feel something I absolutely should not have felt. Pride, joy, something that went beyond appropriate boundaries. That afternoon, we went for a walk in the park near our house. Jake opened up about his life in Boston, about how his grandfather had molded him into something he wasn't, about how Rebecca was more focused on appearances than his actual happiness. He said being in Denver, being with me and Michael, was the first time he'd felt like he could breathe. He said I understood him in a way no one else did. And when he looked at me, really looked at me, I saw something in his expression that terrified me. Admiration, affection, something that could easily be confused for more. That night, we made dinner together. We laughed. We talked about everything and nothing. And when he accidentally brushed against me in the kitchen, neither of us moved away as quickly as we should have. The moment stretched too long. My heart was pounding. His breathing had changed. We were standing there, inches apart, and I could feel the heat radiating off him. 16 years old, but in that moment, he didn't feel like a child. He felt like someone who was dangerously close to crossing a line neither of us should even approach. I stepped back. I made some excuse about needing to check on the food. Jake nodded, but his eyes stayed on me. The rest of the night was unbearably awkward. We barely spoke. When it was time for bed, he hugged me goodnight, and it lasted just a second too long. I felt his heartbeat against mine. I felt his breath on my neck, and when he pulled away, he whispered, "Thank you for everything, Sarah." I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what was happening. Jake was a child, Michael's child, my stepson essentially. What I was feeling, what was building between us, was wrong on every level. But I couldn't deny it existed. There was a connection, an emotional intimacy that I hadn't felt with Michael in years. Jake looked at me like I hung the moon. He listened to me, he valued me, and God help me, I liked it. Make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next will shock you. This story takes turns I never saw coming. Sunday morning, Rebecca called. She said she'd be picking Jake up early, around noon. I felt relieved and disappointed at the same time. When I told Jake, his face fell. He asked if we could talk before she arrived, just the two of us. We sat on the back porch, and he told me he didn't want to go back to Boston. He said he wanted to stay in Denver, to live with us, to finally have a real family. He said I made him feel things he'd never felt before. Safe, understood, wanted. I tried to explain that it was complicated, that there were legal issues, that Rebecca would never agree. But he grabbed my hand and said, "I don't care about any of that. I care about you." And the way he said it, the way he looked at me, made it clear he wasn't just talking about maternal affection. This boy, this 16-year-old kid, was developing feelings for me that went way beyond appropriate. And worse, I wasn't sure how to stop them, or if I even wanted to. Rebecca arrived right on time. She was cold and dismissive as usual, barely acknowledging me as she waited for Jake to get his things. But before he left, Jake hugged me again. And this time, he whispered in my ear, "I'll find a way to come back, I promise." The weight of those words settled over me like a storm cloud. After they left, I sat in the empty house and cried. Not because I'd fallen in love with a teenager, nothing like that, but because I'd allowed a connection to form that never should have existed. I'd become emotionally dependent on the validation and attention Jake gave me, attention I wasn't getting from Michael. I'd let a vulnerable kid attach himself to me in unhealthy ways because it made me feel important. And now I had no idea how to fix it. When Michael came home from Atlanta, he could tell something was wrong. I told him everything. About Jake's confession, about the inappropriate tension, about how I'd let boundaries blur. I expected him to be angry. Instead, he looked defeated. He said he'd felt it too, the way Jake gravitated toward me. He said part of him was grateful because at least Jake was connecting with someone in the family. But another part of him was jealous and hurt that his own son preferred his wife. We spent the next week in a strange limbo. Michael tried calling Jake, but the kid barely responded. Rebecca sent a curt email saying Jake was fine and didn't need any visits for a while. It felt like we were being shut out. And honestly, maybe that was for the best. Maybe we all needed distance to figure out what the hell had happened. But then, 2 weeks later, Jake showed up at our door, alone, at 11 o'clock at night. Don't go anywhere. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that button now. You need to hear how this ends. He'd taken a bus from Boston. He'd left Rebecca a note saying he needed time away. He'd come to Denver because, in his words, it was the only place that felt like home. Michael and I didn't know what to do. We called Rebecca immediately, and she was hysterical. She demanded we put Jake on the next flight back, but Jake refused. He said if we made him go back, he'd just run away again. He said he was miserable in Boston, that his grandfather was controlling every aspect of his life, and that he couldn't take it anymore. We were stuck. Legally, we had no rights to keep him, but sending him back against his will felt cruel. Michael and I argued for hours that night after Jake went to sleep in the guest room. Michael thought we should respect Rebecca's wishes and send him home. I thought we should let him stay, at least for a little while, until everyone calmed down. But the real issue, the one we both avoided talking about, was the emotional minefield Jake's presence created. Jake stayed for 3 days while we negotiated with Rebecca. During that time, the tension in the house was unbearable. Jake followed me around like a lost puppy. He'd sit next to me on the couch, help me with every little task, find excuses to be close. Michael watched all of it with growing resentment. He tried to bond with Jake, But the kid gave him nothing. It was like Michael didn't exist, and I could see it breaking my husband's heart. On the third night, after Michael went to bed early, clearly exhausted from the emotional toll, Jake came to the kitchen where I was cleaning up. He stood there for a long moment before speaking. He said, "I know this is messed up. I know I'm making everything complicated, but I can't help how I feel." I asked him what he meant, even though I knew. He said, "You're the first person who's ever really seen me, and I don't know what to do with that." I sat him down. I explained, as gently as I could, that what he was feeling wasn't love. It was gratitude and attachment, amplified by the pain of his complicated family situation. I told him I cared about him deeply, but as a stepmother, as family. I told him he needed to work on his relationship with Michael, his real father, and I told him that the dynamic between us needed to change. We needed boundaries. He cried. This tall, almost man teenager cried like a little boy. He said he understood, but he also said he didn't know how to turn off his feelings. He said going back to Boston felt like going back to prison. He said he felt more alive in Denver in a few weeks than he had in 16 years. And he asked me, point blank, if I felt anything for him beyond the maternal. If you're still watching, please subscribe. These stories connect us all, and your support means everything. I couldn't lie to him. I told him the truth. I said yes, there was a connection between us that had become confusing. I said I'd allowed inappropriate emotional intimacy to develop because I was lonely in my own marriage. I said I'd failed both him and Michael by not maintaining proper boundaries. And I said that was exactly why things needed to change. Because what we were doing, what we were feeling, could destroy everyone involved. The next morning, Rebecca arrived with her father, a stern man in an expensive suit who looked at Michael and me like we were criminals. There was a screaming match. Rebecca accused us of manipulating her son. Her father threatened legal action. Michael tried to defend us, but his voice was lost in the chaos. And Jake just stood there, silent, watching everything fall apart. In the end, Jake went back to Boston, but not before pulling me aside and making me promise we'd stay in touch. He said he'd be 18 in less than 2 years, and then he could make his own choices. The way he said it, the implication behind his words, made my stomach turn. He wasn't letting this go. In his mind, this wasn't over. It was just paused. After they left, Michael and I sat in silence for hours. Finally, he said the words I'd been dreading. He said he didn't know if our marriage could survive this. He said every time he looked at me, he saw the way Jake looked at me. He said he felt like he was losing both his son and his wife. And the worst part was, I couldn't deny any of it, because he was right. We started marriage counseling. We talked about our problems, about the emotional distance that had grown between us, about how we'd both failed to communicate. The therapist said what happened with Jake was a symptom of deeper issues in our relationship. Michael had been so focused on his career that he'd neglected our emotional connection. And I'd been so hungry for validation that I'd sought it in the worst possible place. But knowing the cause didn't make the solution easier. Michael couldn't shake the image of Jake and me together. Even though nothing physical had happened, even though it was just emotional intimacy, it felt like a betrayal to him. And honestly, it was. I'd given pieces of myself to his son that I should have been giving to him. 3 months have passed since Jake left. He texts me occasionally. Nothing inappropriate, just updates about school and his life. But there's always an underlying current to his messages, a hint of what he's really feeling. And every time my phone buzzes with his name, Michael's jaw tightens. We don't talk about it. We've reached this unspoken agreement to pretend everything's fine. But it's not fine. Nothing about this is fine. Last week, Jake sent me a message saying he'd been accepted to a college in Colorado. He said he'd be moving to Denver next fall. He said he wanted to be close to family, close to us. And the way he emphasized us, I knew he really meant you. Michael doesn't know about this yet, and I don't know how to tell him, because I know what it means. It means Jake isn't giving up. It means he's planning to be part of our lives permanently. And it means the situation that I thought might fade with time and distance is about to explode all over again. If you've made it this far, please subscribe and share your thoughts. I need to know I'm not alone in this. Michael and I had a fight last night, a real one. He asked me if I'd heard from Jake. I hesitated just a second too long, and he knew. He demanded to see my phone. When he read the message about the college, about Denver, he lost it. He said I was encouraging Jake's obsession. He said I should have blocked his number months ago. He said I was choosing his son over our marriage. Maybe he's right. Maybe I should have cut off all contact. But every time I think about blocking Jake, I imagine him alone and hurting, and I can't do it. He's a kid who's been through hell, who's searching for something stable. And yes, his feelings for me are inappropriate. Yes, this whole situation is a mess, but abandoning him completely feels cruel. So here I am, stuck between my husband and his son, stuck between doing what's right and what feels compassionate, stuck in a situation that has no good solution. Michael says if Jake moves to Denver and I continue any relationship with him, he'll leave me. Jake says I'm the only person who makes him feel whole. And me? I'm drowning in guilt, confusion, and the wreckage of choices I can't take back. Rebecca called me yesterday. It was the first time we'd spoken since that awful day at our house. She said Jake talks about me constantly. She said his therapist thinks his attachment to me is unhealthy and needs to be addressed. She said if I care about him at all, I'll cut him off completely. And you know what the worst part is? She's probably right. But I don't know if I can do it. Michael came home late from work today. He'd been drinking, which he rarely does. He sat down across from me and said we needed to make a decision. Either I cut off all contact with Jake and we work on saving our marriage, or he's done. No more counseling. No more second chances. He said he can't compete with the ghost of what might have been between his wife and his son. He said it's destroying him from the inside out. I asked for time to think. He gave me until this weekend. 3 days to decide whether I choose my marriage or my connection to a troubled teenager who's developed feelings he shouldn't have. 3 days to figure out if I'm strong enough to hurt someone I care about for the greater good. 3 days to decide who I really am. Before this story ends, I want to ask you something. Please subscribe to this channel, because stories like mine need to be shared. We need to talk about these complicated, messy situations that don't have easy answers. I don't know what I'm going to do. Part of me knows the right answer. I should choose Michael. I should block Jake's number and let him work through his issues with professional help. I should focus on rebuilding the marriage I neglected. But another part of me, the part that felt seen and valued for the first time in years through my connection with Jake, doesn't want to let that go. Even though I know it's wrong. Even though I know it's destructive. Jake texted me this morning. He said he knows things are complicated. He said he doesn't want to cause problems. But then he said, when I turn 18, none of this will be complicated anymore. I'll be an adult, and I can choose who I want in my life. And I choose you. My hands were shaking when I read it, because I know what he's implying. I know what he thinks will happen when he's legally an adult. And the terrifying thing is, I don't know how I feel about it. I'm not in love with Jake. I need to be clear about that. He's a child, Michael's child, and what I feel for him is complicated, but not romantic. But I can't deny that he awakened something in me, a need to be needed, a desire to matter to someone. And that's what scares me most. Because if I'm being honest with myself, the reason I can't let go isn't really about helping Jake. It's about what he gives me. And that makes me exactly the kind of person I never thought I'd be. Michael is waiting for my answer. Jake is waiting for his chance. Rebecca is waiting for me to do the right thing. And me? I'm sitting here at midnight, talking to strangers on the internet because I can't face the people in my real life. I'm trapped in a situation that I helped create, with no clear path forward and consequences no matter what I choose. So I'm asking you, the people who've listened to this whole mess, what would you do in my place? Would you choose your marriage and cut off a kid who desperately needs support? Would you maintain the connection and risk losing everything else? Is there a middle ground I'm not seeing? Because I've turned this over in my mind 1,000 times, and I still don't have an answer. Please, leave your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to follow what happens next. Because one way or another, this weekend, I have to make a choice, and whatever I decide will change the course of 3 people's lives forever, including mine. What would you do in my place?